Hello, everybody. In Module 5, I discussed real effects of accounting disclosures. Module 5 has 6 lessons. Today, we focus on Lesson 5, real effects of measuring intangibles. The discussion is based on Canodi et al. 2004 JAR paper. The paper studies how expensing versus measuring intangible investments has real effects in affecting firms' intangible and tangible investment decisions. Clearly, this is a fundamentally important accounting issue. However, if we model measuring intangibles simply by providing more information, then the solution is trivial. You should always measure intangibles. The Canodi et al. Paper shows that measuring intangibles is more subtle, and it's not necessarily providing strictly more information. We're going to see that the information structure is also quite complicated because modeling expensing versus measuring intangibles requires detailed understanding of the accounting rules and also generalize those understanding into your models. So let's look at the set of the model. As in real effects models, 3 days, 0, 1, and 2. Firm chooses tangible investments, K, and effective or productive or targeted intangible investment, N, at day 0. The actual expenditure, as we're going to see, is going to be different. K and N determines the firm's capital stock based on a Cobb-Douglas production function. That means tangible and intangible investments are complements. It means more tangible investment increases the productivity of intangible investments and vice versa. This capital stock results in operating profits X1 and X2 at days 1 and 2. X1 and X2 jointly normal. Expectation is Q times a profitability mu. Mu is known by everybody, so there is no information asymmetry about the profitability. The cash flow across the 2 periods are correlated. And day 1 pricing rule is just net cash at date 1 plus the expected value of day 2 cash flow conditional on market information at date 1. The firm chooses K and N to maximize the expected value at P1 from day 0 based on the firm's information at day 0. Now let's look at information structure. The primitive information, and not all information is available to everybody, is as follows. The tangible investment K, the intangible investment N, the targeted intangible investment N, the actual intangible expenditure N plus gamma, operating profits X1, and net cash flow at date 1 Z, which is X1 minus all the capital expenditures. So this gamma is considered as a random component in intangible investments. Everybody who does research should be familiar with this. You think about you target 3 months to finish this project. Very often it's going to take more than 3 months. Sometimes it could take less than 3 months because how long it's actually going to take to finish the project depends on the progress throughout the project, which is random at the time you start working on the project. The market's information set at date 1, which determines market's date 1 pricing, depends on the accounting regime. So we consider 2 regimes, intangibles measurement regime and expensing regime. In an expensing regime, the market's information contains the net cash flow, Z, the measurement of tangibles IK, and income YE. In this case, the measurement of tangibles is perfect, IK equals K. There's no confounding noise between tangible measurement and intangible investment. And the measured income is just a Z plus IK, because IK is not part of expense. This also means that because Z equals YE minus IK, so knowing YE and IK, Z has no incremental information content in the expensing regime. Now for the intangibles measurement regime, market's information contains Z, IN, the measurement of intangibles, IK, the measurement of tangibles, and YC, measured income. In this case, IK is not K, it's K plus noise. IN is not N plus gamma, it's N plus gamma plus 2 pieces of noise. First, talk about ADA. ADA arises from confounding intangibles with tangibles. It is not hard to think about examples of assets when it's very hard to differentiate, to separate the tangible components and intangible components. This means that measuring of intangibles is going to mess up measuring of tangibles as well. Omega arises from confounding intangibles with operating expenses. This is also very common. A lot of times for the expenditures, you don't know how much of the expenditures is for long-term benefits, which means it should be an asset, and how much of the expenditures is for short-term benefit, which means it should be operating expenses. And the measured income is the net cash flow plus the tangible and intangible expenditures. And the important thing here is we need eta. If eta equals 0, then IK would equal to K. That means the measurement regime contains all the information that the expensing regime has, and strictly more, because IN is also contained. That means the measurement regime has strictly more information, and the solution will be trivial. Now, before we solve for the model, let's take a look at the big picture intuition. Big picture intuition is that in expensing regime, investors, they only rely on earnings and tangible investment. However, in the measurement regime, investors rely on earnings as well as cash flow. The reason is because the accrual process is noisy. You measure tangible and intangible investment with noise. Whenever the accrual process is noisy, cash flow is going to acquire information content. This is the case for the intangible measurement regime, but not the case for the expensing regime. In the expensing regime, earnings gets directly hurt by intangible investment because intangible investment is treated as expense. And because investors rely on earnings to price the firm, low earnings through positive correlation of cash flow across periods is going to result in lower pricing. That's why there will be underinvestment of intangibles in the expensing regime. The underinvestment in intangibles in the expensing regime is somewhat alleviated in the measurement regime because intangible investments is added back in earnings, even though added back with some noise. So when investors rely more on earnings in a measurement regime, the alleviation effect is going to be stronger. And that's going to result in measurement regime more likely to be better. Now let's first look at the first best benchmark, full information case. The market observes everything, K, N, and X1. And we can use the law of iterated expectations in the first best case. And so the firm's problem reduces to maximize 2Q mu minus K minus N. And we can take first order condition and solve it. In this case, investment ratio is equal to productivity ratio. Now let's look at the expensing regime. In the expensing regime, we can see the price expression. Note that the expectation of X2 is conditional on the earnings because earnings provide information about X1 and X1 is correlated with X2. However, the market does not observe the endogenous choice of intangible investment. So the market has to conjecture. Because the market knows about K, the market is not going to arbitrarily conjecture N. The market is going to conjecture N as a function of K, which means that the market is going to conjecture investment schedule N as a function of K. And in equilibrium, the conjecture will be the same as the actual choice, which means whenever the markets has N in their expression, they replace N with NK. And again, we can use standard Bayesian updating to calculate expected value of X2 conditional on K and YE, taking into account that the market does not observe N. They will just replace N with NK. And after some algebra, we're going to get the results. One thing to note that when firm is taking first order condition with respect to K and N, NK is not affected by firm's choice of N because that's market's conjecture, so that's fixed. We can see in the expensing regime, K over N, the ratio is bigger than alpha over beta. So we have relatively overinvestment in tangibles. We can also show that K and N are smaller than the first best level. So that will be underinvestment, but that will be severely more underinvestment in intangibles than tangibles. So the intuition from underinvestment comes from what we discussed in previous lessons. There is no private information about productivity, so there is no signaling incentive. And measurement noise reduces the marginal benefits of investing. Why is there a relative overinvestment in tangibles? Because tangibles is measured with no noise. So investors, they can observe tangibles. They're going to use tangible investment to infer intangible investment, which means tangible investment conveys a signaling role for intangible investment. That's why a relative overinvestment in intangibles. Now let's look at the measurement regime. In the measurement regime, the market cannot observe K or N. The market has to form conjectures for both. And the market observes the cash flow and earnings at day 2. And they need to form expectation of X2 conditional on the cash flow and earnings. The cash flow and earnings, there are 2 noisy signals about X2. And so X2 is the exogenous variable. So market is going to figure out X2 using Bayes' rule based on their conjecture about K and N, which is K hat and N hats. And so in the measurement regime, we have Qk over Qn equals 1, where Qk is the partial derivative of Q with respect to K, and Qn is the partial derivative of Q with respect to N. So you're going to see that the tangible-intangible investment ratio is still the first best. So there is no relative distortion. However, you will still have underinvestments with respect to first best. And the intuition for underinvestment is similar. There is no information asymmetry about productivity, and you measure things with noise. And intuition for the ratio being the first best is, again, noisy measures of endogenous variables convey no information content. People are just going to make the conjecture, and they're going to treat the discrepancy as noise. In this case, there is no signaling role of K as in the expensing regime. Therefore, you got the first best ratio. Now we're going to compare regimes. Because they're underinvesting in both regimes, whatever regime with a larger capital stock is going to be better. And we can calculate the capital stock in both regimes. And we can see here, measurement is better if and only if the following expression holds. On the left-hand side of the expression, it only depends on the measurement properties of accounting system. The right-hand side only depends on technological parameters. And we can show that measurement regime is going to be better if sigma omega square is lower, which means that the measurement noise of intangibles is lower. When the measurement noise of intangibles is lower, investors are going to put less weight on cash flow, and it's going to put more weight on earnings because the accrual process is less noisy. In this case, the measurement regime, as we discussed before, alleviates the negative impact of intangible investments because they add back the intangible investment to earnings. Measurement regime is also going to be better if sigma gamma squared and rho is going to be higher, which means that when the cash flow persistence is going to be higher, or when the intangibles expenditure are inherently more noisy, you can think about this as R&D being more risky. Because in those cases, when the cash flow persistence is higher, and when the intangible expenditure is inherently more noisy, investors are going to rely more on earnings and less on cash flow. So in this case, relying more on earnings means that measurement regime is more likely to be better. And measurement regime is also going to be better if intangibles is more important. Because when intangibles is more important, the negative impact of intangible investment on earnings is more severe in expensing regime. When intangibles is more important, you don't want to underinvest in intangibles. But such underinvestment is more severe in expensing regime due to signaling concerns. That's why measurement regime is better in this case. So to conclude, overall, when there is no information asymmetry about profitability, there will be underinvestment in both tangible and intangible because of measurement noise. Measuring intangible is preferred when intangibles are sufficiently important and the measurement noise is sufficiently small. And this seems to be consistent with the practice of intangible measurements. And then I have a follow-up paper together with Chandra Kanodia and Gao-Qing Zhang. In this case, we introduce this information asymmetry about profitability. In this case, there will be overinvestment incentive. And we look at a different research question. So if you're interested in it, check this paper out. If you want to test your understanding of this lesson, you can click on the quiz on the link provided in the slides. Thank you very much.